Managing sessions with Desktop Director. So, I don't know. What do you think? Do you think like the help desk pros these days, do you think that they kind of have it, in certain ways, they kind of have it easier than how we used to do things back in the old days? You remember, I remember a time back when I was working on the help desk, this was many years ago, when someone would call in and they'd have a problem, the biggest tool that we had available to us was just simply our memory. And trying to troubleshoot what that person was experiencing a lot of times involved closing our eyes and trying to experience what we remember about that application or that session or that experience, and then trying to walk them through fixing it. Well, those days are long past, and today our environments are far more complicated than they used to be. And indeed, there's more moving parts going on in a Citrix environment than there ever was back in the day. And so, as a result of that, the tools that we may have used back then, they just don't work anymore. You know, we have to provide more visibility to people sitting on the help desk because they need to be able to know what's going on. They need to be able to see what sorts of behaviors are being experienced so they can help people ultimately come to a resolution. That's what really the idea is behind Desktop Director. Now, Desktop Director originally was released with Xen Desktop. That's why it's called Desktop Director. It is this tool that provides a kind of just a rudimentary troubleshooting interface so that a help desk person with the types of tickets a help desk person would be resolving can take a look at the session, or in the case of Xen Desktop, the look at the desktop, and see what's going on, what behaviors are being experienced, what features are being used, what events are being kicked up, what performance is being seen, what applications are being connected to. You know, all these are just some very basic information that a help desk technician would need when somebody calls in. In fact, whenever you first launch Desktop Director, it is a web-based app, the very first thing you're going to see is a mostly blank screen that says insert or in or search for a user's name. And so as you punch in that user's username, it's going to slowly give you an idea of which user you want. You click on that user, and then you get all the information you need. In fact, the amount of information it delivers to that technician is so much greater than probably they've ever had in the past. I'll show you what it looks like here, and it's actually very impressive. So the notion here is that, well, we have the Citrix App Center console. And I don't want to give the full App Center console to the help desk. Who knows what they're going to do if they don't, if I mistakenly change the rights on something. I want them to have a very limited interface for performing the kind of troubleshooting that they're responsible for in doing their jobs. So this is what Desktop Director is ostensibly for. Now, in order to get Desktop Director installed, there's kind of it's a very big, there's a lot of steps involved. Let's call it that. And they are not entirely obvious. And so I want to kind of help you understand what those steps are. I've already installed it because the first few pieces that are required is installing Flash 10.x or higher, .NET Framework 3.5.1, IIS, and then you have to go through and install Desktop Director version 2, then version 2.1, and then version 2.1.1. And one assumes that if you're watching this series at some point after I've actually recorded this today, that there will be other versions that need to happen potentially after this as well. So the 2 to 2.1 to 2.1.1 is required because there's just no direct install right now for 2.1.1. You also have to, at least at this point, install this WMI provider hotfix 131.221. That goes on the XenApp server, not on the web interface server where Desktop Director can be installed to. Commonly, this thing gets installed onto your web interface server. Okay, and because it's a web server. For some of us, our web server is also a XenApp server, but if they're separate, then I would put it on the web server. That just gets the bits installed. Now recall, Desktop Director was originally written for Xen Desktop. So once it installs, there's actually some reconfiguration of IIS, the application settings in IIS, that you have to do in order to get it to work with XenApp. And strangely enough, the only thing you have to do is to add an XA at the end of one of these application settings. Very strange. Once you've done that, you will then need to enable and configure WinRM on your Xen App servers. Now, WinRM is the Windows Remote Management function built into Server 2008 R2. It is the mechanism that allows some other machine to request information from a local computer, from a remote computer. It's not turned on by default. You're going to have to run you've probably heard of this before, it's WinRM and then the quick config. You first got to run that to essentially turn it on, open up port in the firewall, set up the listener appropriately, and all the stuff that WinRM needs just to get set up. Well, then there's a second command that you need to turn on or run on your Xen App servers so that Desktop Director can then query and gather whatever information that it requires. There is a small likelihood that you may already have this turned on via group policy as well. Okay, if you have it turned on via group policy, you can skip one of the steps, but not two. And then lastly, you'll need to configure which groups you want to give permissions to actually use Desktop Director. And the way that you do that is really odd. So I'll show you how it works here. So let's spend some time actually going through an initial configuration of Desktop Director and then actually showing you what it looks like. Now, I'll admit that I have already installed it onto one of these machines. Okay, and that's just because I don't think you wanted to see me go next, finish through the 2.0, the 2.1, and the 2.1.1 installs and all that other stuff. I've actually not installed it here onto XA Nugget 1. I've put it over here on XA Nugget 2 it made more sense. This is my web interface server. So I have installed IIS. I have installed .NET Framework. I have installed the Adobe piece. I've installed the Citrix hotfix. I've installed 2.0, 2.1, and 2.11, and now I'm at the step where I need to actually make this very slight change to the Desktop Director application in IIS. So here I am in IIS Manager, and I've navigated down to this server, so XA Nugget 2, and I'm taking a look at the Desktop Director application. And there's one setting in here under Application Settings that you are going to want to have to adjust, and that's this one. Now, when it comes out of the box, there is no XA underneath or behind service.autodiscovery address. But you need to add XA there to note that it's a Xen App server as opposed to a Xen desktop server. And then down here, drop in the name of the server that you're going to query against. Okay, so just the server that's got controller pieces on it that it can enumerate all the stuff that Desktop Director needs. When you are done with that, and you've got it up and going, then we go back to our Xen App server. And on our Xen App server, we've got to do two things. We've got to run the WinRM quick config, which I've also already done. And running that will actually essentially just set up WinRM to receive requests and to perform remote management on that machine. When you've completed that step, the next step is actually to configure one of the WinRM components. And what we're doing here is we're setting up the component enable compatibility HTTP listener equals true. So essentially we're turning on the HTTP listener. Right? If I click there, you'll see that I get essentially the entire results. And now enable compatibility HTTP listener set to true. If you intend on using SSL and HTTPS, I'm not going to show you all the certificate stuff that you need to do, but then you might also want to enable the HTTPS listener here as well. So this needs to be done on all of your Xen App servers. You can do it either via command line, you can do it through PowerShell, you can do it through group policy, whatever you need to in order to make WinRM actually function on those servers. So once you've completed that, the next thing you'll want to do is take a look at this knowledge base article. It's knowledge base article 131165. And I'm pointing this to you rather than actually giving you the command line for it because what Citrix has done is create this little config remote management tool. And when you use this tool, it's actually right here, CFG machine permission. The domain admins group is the group that has access to use Desktop Director. Now, obviously, your help desk people are probably not in domain admins. So you need to use this tool to grant the permissions to a different user security group, like your help desk users, for Desktop Director. Okay, and all this really is it's taking a bunch of commands and putting them together in something that's a little easier to use. So take a look at this config remote management tool. Again, the CTX number is 131165. Now, once you've done that, the next thing you need to do is essentially launch Desktop Director, which will be in the Desktop Director folder, more or less. Now, the very first time you launch Desktop Director, it takes a good few seconds here because it's actually kind of rendering some code for that very first instance. After that, you're not going to see this kind of long delay in the Desktop Director interface popping up. But the very first time, it actually does take just a second or two. In fact, both web interface and receiver take a little bit of time also whenever they first come on after getting them installed. Now, you'll notice I'm not using a secure connection here. I don't have certificate set up just to make things easy. And I want to log in here with my usual username and password. And that will log me into the Desktop Director interface. And there's not much there, honestly. You know, when you first take a look at this, and it's tough to see here in 800 by 600, all we really have is this little box that says, all right, well, who's got a problem today? I actually have a session that's currently running on one of the Xen app servers, and so on XA1. And so it shows my ID here. I can click on that, and then now from within the interface that results, I get some really useful information about my session. So what application am I connected to? In this case, it's the App Center application. What are the server details here? What are the session details here? Am I experiencing latency or not? So I scroll down here, what is my activity being seen for this computer across memory, network, CPU? And then up here at the top, or excuse me, on the right, I have some really useful HDX instrumentation. All of this is coming to me through that HDX protocol. What it really provides for me is essentially a stoplight chart for the different features that may or may not be used in the session and whether or not they're functioning correctly or not. Really useful end-user experience monitoring here. Like map drives. Well, they're idle, their priority is medium, there are no alerts, I'm allowed a certain amount of bandwidth, that's good. Oh, look here, Adobe Flash. Well, look here, Flash Player is actually not installed on the server, so I may not be able to render, or probably won't be able to render any Flash animations on that server. So I probably should tell the administrator that they need to install Flash on that server. That's good to know. Network, let's see here. Well, I don't have any network counters. Maybe I've got a problem here with different services that I need to elevate up to the systems administrator. Maybe I have some status information here that maybe, again, would let me know more detail about the reason why that user is having a problem. So really, really, again, useful information here about why the user may be experiencing certain issues with their session. I can view Active Directory details for that user if they're populated in Active Directory, like phone information. In fact, I don't have a phone configured here for this user, or I can even email the user if I want. And then over here to the left, in the center here, I have the ability to send a message to that user and then either terminate or disconnect the current user session. So all these, again, very handy things that a help desk administrator is going to want for troubleshooting the types of issues that are going to come in to that first line set of individuals. So what have we talked about this now? We've talked about managing sessions with Desktop Director and how that first line of defense can be enabled with these really, really rich tools on what kinds of behaviors are going on with that session. Talked about how it is a web-based troubleshooting tool specifically defined or designed for the needs of help desk technicians, and it gives them that limited interface for troubleshooting. I talked a little bit about the multiple step install and kind of pointed you to a couple of the CTX articles that you need to be aware of in order to get this thing up and running. It is not a very straightforward install. And then lastly, we concluded with completing the install, or at least going through the post-installation requirements, and then taking a look at Desktop Director and what it actually facilitates for your help desk users. Coming up next, we're going to talk a little bit about the receiver storefront, which, as I mentioned earlier, is to be the replacement for web interface. And receiver storefront, it's really awesome in some places in this version, and it's maybe not got as much functionality as web interface does in other ways. So it's kind of an interesting exercise in taking a look at where Citrix, I believe, intends to go with how to connect users and their receiver clients up into the applications and desktops they have available. All of that's coming up next, but until then, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.